car was a 1968 GT390.
It's time to go to work. You need to choose your next picture carefully.
You find me the car, I'll pick my next project.
You're a movie star, Steve. Surely it comes with its own set of burdens. Let's start from the beginning.
We've both done things.
No, you did things. This is what you did.
How does it feel to be a movie star?
Look, Doc, I agreed to come here because I'm trying to save my marriage. What does my job have to do with it? How far are we going?
We'll see how I enjoy the ride.
It's not just a job, Steve. It's the fame, drugs, extramarital encounters. Wouldn't you agree? It's not a normal job.
You're right, Doc. You're right.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 193. Out on demand, March 5, across all streams, across all regions, is Chasing Bullitt, a biopic that looks at the man and the myth that was Steve McQueen, a mortal star of films such as The Great Escape and Bullitt. A warts and all dive into the life of a movie star who dealt with many demons. Chasing Bullitt is recommended viewing for fans of Steve McQueen and especially for the performance by Andre Brooks, who I gotta say is a real dead ringer for the late great movie star. Joining me now to talk about Chasing Bullitt is the film's writer and director Joe Eddy. Joe, thank you very much for joining me today.
Hi Matt, thank you for having me.
So, out of all the movie stars that has graced our screens over our lifetime, what is it about Steve McQueen that made you want to make a biopic about him specifically?
Well, first off, I think there's a real danger right now that people might be forgetting about McQueen. Even when we were putting it together and just interviewing crew, we worked with some younger people, so a whole slew of new people that kind of need to be reintroduced to McQueen. And for me personally, growing up and being introduced to a lot of films by my dad, McQueen was a big presence in those. And also my uncle, Ken. So there was always a big fascination with early movie stars for me. And McQueen was at the top of the list for me.
Joe, my first experience with Steve McQueen was, and I think this is the same with everyone, was The Great Escape. And then after that, you go into the filmography. One of my favourite movies, which is referenced in your title of your film, Bullitt. Just fantastic filmmaking. To me, that was like a precursor for like the stuff that Michael Mann has been doing for the last 20 years. It was like a crime movie ahead of its time. What about for you, Joe? What was your first? Do you remember the first time you saw Steve McQueen on screen? Do you remember what movie it was?
I do believe it was The Great Escape as well. It was I'm from Chicago, so it was on, I believe it was on Channel 9 locally, which was WGN, which was only local at the time, and watched with my dad. I remember just being an epic marathon of, it was exciting and funny, and here was this guy that just seemed to be, kind of how you wanted to be when you grew up, just a very confident, masculine guy who's so engaging, and it was the perfect primer, because after that you're like, well, what else is he in? And then that led to Bullitt and Towering Inferno and Papillon and all of them.
The time period of the movie is really interesting. You're looking at 1970, 1971. McQueen had just left France after the disastrous shoot of Le Mans over there. The film itself is really just a type of kind of like existential journey through this man's kind of like who he was and what people perceived him to be. When choosing all the time periods that McQueen had, you could have easily done kind of like the rise of Steve McQueen through his early years, what have you. What was it about this period specifically that called out to you that said this would make a good drama and a good biopic?
When I was first sort of, kind of feeling out the idea and just thinking about whether or not that, this was going to be possible, I was focused on post-Le Mans, because what I had read and what I had watched, including the fantastic documentary The Man in Le Mans, was after that was over, I was like, I wonder what happened then. because that seemed like that was probably the worst portion of his life. I mean, it was the man who was on top of the world and then was seemingly losing everything at the same time. And that seemed to me like a really great jumping off point. Just, from a storytelling point of view, obviously just conflict, because that was the most conflict of his entire life. And also what we could kind of encapsulate in the story in a more pared down cerebral story. Like you said, the movie, the choice was not to go with a larger scale, more traditional biopic. Obviously, budgetary reasons did play in that. That's realistic, but it was to do something that was more a meditation on his psyche, to sort of try and get into his head. And that approach lent itself to that period in particular, because it was, for McQueen, as far as his success, it was relatively short as far as him being down. Obviously, his marriage did eventually end, but that period was, relatively short but entirely fascinating.
Yeah. What's also fascinating about this time period is that McQueen seemed to be an actor that seemed to be stuck in two Hollywoods. You had the studio system, which was going away. That was what he kind of grew in. Magnificent Seven, Great Escape, they were pictures of the studio era. And he's going to this new era where young upstarts like a Dustin Hoffman, for example, which features in the film, is portrayed in the movie as well. These kind of method kind of guys are coming up, and it's becoming more of an actor's kind of playground. That was a really interesting thing as well. Did you find that to be a really fascinating kind of environment for McQueen to kind of find himself in at this time?
Absolutely. I mean, at that period, overall, McQueen was, as an actor, he was always his own man and very, I wouldn't necessarily say like problematic, but he was a guy that knew what he wanted and knew the type of films that he wanted to be and to be in. But he also had a difficult relationship just with the occupation. And I think we touched on that in the film, that he was, always feeling like it wasn't the most, for lack of a better term, also not one of the most, masculine jobs at the time. I mean, that's how he felt, so he used to, kind of downplay it. But on the other hand, he was deadly serious about his craft and about, the type of actor that he wanted to be. So in the 70s, especially, he tried to branch out a couple times in smaller films, but it really was a larger system trying to put him in his place. And then the whole concept of first artists and bringing artists together, it was appealing to him, but also, well, you're going to kind of also have me join a part of this machine, which was another thing that he was, uncomfortable with. So he had a really, like I said, and this is just from, my own research and in doing the film, that it was a real love-hate relationship with the profession and the type of man I think he wanted to be, or at least the type of man he wanted to present to others.
For me, it also kind of personified his relationship with authority figures as well. I mean, the movie lets everyone know, and I think a lot of people forget about Steve McQueen as well, that his upbringing was really tragic. His father left him at an early age. His mum left him for a while. She came back. There was stepfathers that are very abusive towards him. So he had a real kind of like thing against authority figures as well. And that really kind of shows itself. Do you think that kind of thing as well kind of made him kind of, I wouldn't say was defiant, but at least very suspicious towards people like managers, producers and directors in regards to them telling him what to do, considering he probably saw himself as a survivor and knew exactly what he wanted and how he wanted to go and achieve it?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think we try to portray, sort of all the different aspects of the man that we could, without necessarily offering, definitive excuses for his behavior or how he was. Obviously, we can try to sort of guess, what he was going through, but obviously we would never truly understand what he was going through. But it certainly pointed, his upbringing certainly did point to every decision he made, in his life, because there was so much upheaval. One of the reasons, that we chose to depict, simply like a therapy session was, this was, that was hell for Steve McQueen. I mean, that's what he would perceive as a hellish type situation, but it was also one of those things where he was going to doctors at that point in his career, and I would at least hope that he was able to straighten some of that out in his head.
Yep.
But, I'm not really sure.
Another thing that a lot of people forget about Steve McQueen was that he was actually targeted by Charles Manson. I mean, he was on a certain hit list that Charles Manson had, and it's very much, there's evidence to show that there could be very much a realistic thing there, that Steve McQueen could have been part of that party at Shannon Tate's place and what around that, all that stuff that happened around that time. And which led to him to be like a bloke who carried a handgun like with him forevermore after that. I mean, supposedly even at funerals he had a handgun with him all the time. That kind of part of his life, it really speaks to a kind of psychology of being famous. On one end, you get what he calls the bread, and you get the toys, and you get all this stuff, but on the other end, you got a lot of people trying to do some really bad things to you. It's 2019 now. That Shannon Tate thing happened in 1969, so we're heading into like the 50th year of that whole kind of thing. That moment in time in Hollywood, in your research, what do you think that did to actors, to superstars afterwards? I mean, before that, I'd imagine that. I mean, afterwards, I'd imagine that security concerns, relations with fans, relations with audit figures, cult-like figures, for example, a lot of that stuff would have been really kind of tightened up and such. And for a guy like Steve McQueen, who was already such a kind of introverted kind of person, and who kept things to himself, I imagine that a level of paranoia would have been attained by him around that time. It's certainly, like I said, it would seem that it really did, on the most basic level, scare him. I'm sure on a psychological level, that was also pretty impactful, just because, yes, he was supposed to be there. I mean, his good friend Jay Sebring was there. He died. There's the story of exactly how and why he didn't go is, there's sort of different tales. The one that I think popped up more was, once again, it was because he was being unfaithful to Neil, and that he had picked up a woman that evening, and that's why he was not there. Yeah. So that alone, trying to process, would be excruciating, obviously. But on top of everything, with the sort of spiraling and some of the drug use and everything else, that was a like you said, did not help with the paranoia factor. I mean, that was not, it was a heavy thing to deal with at that point in his life, for sure. And it did ripple. I mean, it did ripple through Hollywood, and everyone. It was just so close. And yeah, now 50 years later, I mean, it's getting revisited on a couple of stories. It definitely is. There's a few films coming out now. I guess it's just whether it's coincidence or not, I don't know, but it's definitely something that I think a lot of people are going to look back on as a kind of shifting of attitudes towards a lot of things in the Hollywood community. I want to talk about Andre Brooks, who plays Steve McQueen in your movie. I'd imagine trying to cast someone to play someone as iconic as a movie star Steve McQueen was would have been a tricky situation. You wanted to find someone who had that look, because I'd imagine, Joe, that you and I would agree that you can't think of anyone else maybe outside of James Dean or Marilyn Monroe who had such an iconic kind of look and brought so much iconography to the whole cinema landscape of that time. So you had that going, but then you had someone who was portraying such an introverted character, had a lot of demons and such. So how did that all come about in casting Andre in this movie? When was the first time you saw him, and when was the first time you knew that this guy is going to be McQueen?
Well, obviously, I think that the looking like the person obviously helps suspend the disbelief, but it's not going to be what makes the performance. And obviously with McQueen, that's going to be the most important thing. I mean, you can look like Steve, but if you can't sort of capture what the qualities that made him, you're going to be lost. So with Andre, it was just kind of by chance, but it goes back to my first film, Coyote, and a supporting character that in my brain I wanted someone with a McQueen quality, because I'd always pictured that character like McQueen in The Magnificent Seven, which was, a sporting part, not a lot of lines, but when he's in a scene, he's going to kind of grab you. Yep. No matter what. So we had when we were holding auditions for Coyote, and that was exactly the type of person that I was looking for. When Andre walked in, I was kind of like, whoa. Well, to see him was strange, because the resemblance was strongly there even then. But for that part, it was like, okay, is he good for this part? And he was great. But then we became close, and I knew that he had a fascination. He was a fan of McQueen and an admirer of McQueen, and when I was trying to sort of piece together what my second film was going to be, and sometimes ideas or the movie you're going to make, those things come to you, not just through desire, but also you need to sort of filter that through means and time and availability and all these things. As an independent filmmaker, you need to take all those things into account. And I know I wanted to work with Andre, and I know he would be interested in something like that. And then once I started to get that, when I got the through line of the car, that's when everything sort of started to click, that we might be able to put this together. And I was feeling confident that Andre could nail the performance. But then there was also, in addition to being able, to having that connection and Andre being able to play Steve, it was also a connection that I knew that Augie would be able to play Neil Adams. And these were two fine actors that I already had the opportunity to work with. So you start to feel kind of the movie universe working in your favor, that, maybe this is the direction that you go in. And luckily, Andre was enthusiastic about playing the part. He was all in as far as doing the transformation, changing his hair, just kind of, it was kind of crazy in a lot of ways how he was, just to feel the weight of McQueen at the time and convey that. He really did a good job with, because it's not really how Andre is. Andre doesn't sort of carry himself with, the weight of the world or even, obviously, with all the burdens that McQueen had. But so yeah, a lot of luck that Andre came into our life and that this movie could be made when it did. Certainly.
When you have a movie like this with a subject such as Steve McQueen, you yourself are an independent filmmaker. This is an independent film, and you're dealing with a lot of things. So you have the look of the character, you have the period of the time, early 1970s, and you got the cars as well. Got all these different elements. When you are a filmmaker that's working on a limited budget, you have to bring all these elements together. Can you talk me through that? What type of decisions do you have to make? Does the script that you start with change as the film progresses? Do things become smaller but being more intimate? Does it become more powerful? Can you explain me just some of the logistics and some of the philosophies behind creating a biopic on a limited budget as an independent filmmaker?
So we knew, that there were going to be limitations, from the beginning. I know that just for me, I want to tell a compelling story. I want to, tell something that people haven't necessarily seen or heard. And I like the challenge. I think I felt that, for a particular budget and a particular approach, that something like this hadn't really been attempted, not on this scale. I mean, we certainly would have been easier to maybe run off into the woods and made a zombie movie or something like that, but it felt like it's a way more worthwhile project to attempt a movie, that McQueen hasn't been depicted in a narrative film, on camera. As far as the screenplay goes, it was pretty set how I wanted to approach it, and it was spare in its inception, deliberately so, because you had mentioned that it was more of an existential journey, and it is. It's more of a to nuts and bolts of depicting more of a mindscape that deals with the iconography of McQueen, and rather than a strict realism, if that makes sense. I knew that it was going to mostly be sort of a two-hander, in most of the scenes, so that every scene could reflect to a certain extent just what simply could be McQueen's memories alone, or what were in his head alone, and what he chose to remember. And sometimes those are, sort of strict and more grounded in realism, or they were more, for lack of a better term, like cinematic, that maybe, he would have memories that he would picture as cinematic, in his brain. Yep. Or how he saw himself. Because as, even approaching it, him as a subject, it's like, at the end of the day, those of us that are fans, we only know McQueen's persona on screen. Yep. And to me, I wondered, well, would how he saw himself, would that sort of translate into, like I said, thoughts, memories, just a more cinematic person. So all of that, as far as the production, lent itself to a scaled back, overall production design. But then you made sure that you really focused on those details that were the remaining details. So the remaining period details, there's perhaps less of them, but there's going to be more of a focus on them by people, watching them. So we made sure that architecture was correct and signage was correct, and the stickers on the license plates themselves, the cars, this all seems I mean, probably pretty obvious if you're going to make a period piece, but on a smaller budget, these are things that could easily fall through the cracks. So that you really had to pay attention. It was also important for me too that the sort of depiction of the 70s wasn't what we kind of normally see, which is more of an over-the-top sort of version of the 70s, where everyone had shag carpet and everyone had, gaudy wallpaper and everyone had, what we feel is kind of that movie version of the 70s.
Yep.
And also it being early 1971, there was still sort of a cultural crossover between the late 60s and the early 70s that we were trying to capture there too.
Yep.
So when, we knew that we've only got so much on-screen time with McQueen, that as much as he was a fashion icon, there was sort of his everyday wear, right? Which is why he kind of wore what he did for part of the film, and then something that's completely iconic, which is the racing suit, which is why we chose to go with the racing suit. I mean, even with Augie, Neil, when they were married, she didn't always have sort of the short bob, but it was important to portray her as that era of Neil. In 1971. So we tried to kind of, so you would get those images in your brain. That was kind of the approach to the period.
Yeah. You researched, Steve, you made a film about his life. Was there something about him or his story that caught you off guard, that surprised you? Because what I really like about your film is that you showed a warts and all kind of thing about him as a person, as a character, as the myth. And you didn't shy away from the parts of his life that could be perceived as negative because that's who he was. Was there something about him as a person that really surprised you in your research?
I was surprised with the abuse.
Yep.
That was, difficult to discover for better or for worse. As filmmakers, you elevate, certain people. Even as just a kid, when you just want to be like somebody, it doesn't matter if it's an athlete or an actor or, whomever. But the thing is that to a certain extent made the film more personal for me. And I have a dear relative, close relative, that was a victim of abuse, and she means a lot to me. And all of a sudden, exploring this famous actor, who I obviously don't know, became an extension of exploring another person in my life that I never really knew as well, but he, is related. So it took on a strange paradigm then, but ultimately it was important to me as a storyteller to, sort of throw out any kind of saying or just trying to not be married to upholding the myth, but showing an accurate portrayal, simply because what's fascinated me about a lot of biopics is that I feel like a lot of them sort of sweep the ugly stuff under the rug.
Yeah.
But if you're going to have a historical, or discussion about a historically significant person and what their legacy is, those elements need to be in the conversation, because then you need to ask yourself, is what they have produced or what they represent, is that worth them having been possibly a horrible person to some people? Are there no excuses for that behavior? Are there some excuses for that behavior? It became a really complex journey for me as far as reconciling my own feelings about McQueen. And honestly, I still think about it. I don't even know still what my own conclusion is. I mean, throughout the journey of this movie, I've had multiple times to sort of return to those thoughts of ultimately how do I feel about Steve McQueen, and it's a difficult answer. And I think people are going to come away from the movie feeling the same way. I think some people are going to be, who cares if he made a bunch of good movies? He was a monster, or they're going to somehow understand. I'm not really sure, but that was absolutely 100% the most important part of the story to tell, because it was part of the man. So
my approach when it comes to something like that is that I think it is vital to separate the art from the person, because in many ways the people that they're portraying on screen is a personification of themselves or an extension of themselves playing a different character. Otherwise, if we go by the approach of a person's personal life is going to dictate what they've done on screen or on music or what they've written, for example, we're going to have to burn half the stuff that we own to these people, because there's some real seriously messed up people out there who just happen to be really good artists, and I think it's been like that for a real long time. So myself, from a critical standpoint, I have to leave that stuff on the wayside, unless, however, what they're doing is a kind of extension of their personal life. Then it becomes tricky. I never saw that myself in McQueen's work, which is like yourself, when you look at reports about McQueen, the man, and some of the abuses, the abuse allegations and things that have come out from his own life, it does bring a certain amount of trepidation at times. But, once A Great Escape comes on the screen, I'm not going to deny the experience of that based on his kind of what he did as a person. On that,
how do you? I mean, just out of curiosity, I mean, do you struggle with it ever? I mean, is it easy to separate for you?
It's never easy. I mean, sometimes it can depend on who the person is and of the crimes or the allegations put against them. For example, I love Chinatown. But you can't help but have in the back of your head who Roman Polanski was and what he did, for example. That's one thing there. Mel Gibson things kind of similar. There's films, Mel Gibson I find to be a very talented actor and filmmaker, but at the same time you got that things in the back of your head. On the other hand, if you have someone like Robert Downey Jr. who went through all these kind of drug issues and such, that was a bloke struggling with something that was very kind of like, what a lot of people do struggle with. So I think you got to weigh that stuff up sometimes, and I think as well it comes down to what they've been accused of as well. But what's on screen, I think you have to separate what's on real life to what's on screen. Now, having said that, if Kevin Spacey never makes another movie again, I'm cool with that. But if he did make a movie and I was asked to watch it, I watch it and try my best to try to differentiate the person from the artwork. I think that's the way we have to go about it, because as far back as we can remember, even some of the greats, even from way like hundreds of years ago, were pretty horrible human beings, and I think you have to really take stock of who they are and what they've done as compared to what they produced in regards to an art form. I think it's important to differentiate between the two. Speaking of what Steve McQueen brought to the screen, I'd like to end our interview just to go back and forth briefly just about what is our favourite McQueen movie and performance, because sometimes the two differentiate. So I'll go first. My favourite movie is The Great Escape, because that was the first one I saw, and it's a fantastic kind of a movie. A lot of people forget that movie was based on true events as well, so a lot of people forget that in regards to that film. My favourite performance, however, was in The Magnificent Seven. Just on the sheer fact that he can steal scenes with such subtlety, taking the movie away from Yul Brynner with just a little glance, or just the way he handles his shotgun, for example. So it's just great kind of just filmmaking there, where it shows him the little things have such a big impact. What about you, Jay? What favourite movie, favourite performance of Steve McQueen?
Well, before I answer, I mean, just out of curiosity, the movie alludes to other McQueen films throughout. Were you able to spot some of them?
Well, Bullitt for sure is in there. The movie that he's doing at the start of the film, where he's talking about what's it called? When he's in the cowboy hat, I think that's Junior Bonner. I think he was doing it there.
Yes.
Le Mans, of course, they talked about. When he's with the hitchhiker, they talked about what was it called? The caper film.
Thomas Crown
Affair. Thank you very much. They talked about that there. I'm just trying to think what else would have they touched on. Well, you can always think about The Getaway because of the whole thing with Ali McGraw in there as well. I mean, it touches on so many different facets of his life. But I think the number ones that come home, of course, Le Mans, Bullitt, Junior Brunner, Thomas Crown Affair were the top 4 in there. Is there anything else that I'm missing?
No, I think that's it.
I'm pretty sure those are the
Possibly
4.
I'm just hoping people are catching them. There's just little nods, little asides in there for the fan. We'd hope that it was definitely accessible to McQueen fans, but also a primer for those people that weren't that hip to McQueen, and that it would actually make them want to go out and explore more on their own. That was kind of part of the goal. But my favorite McQueen performance is Sand Pebbles. I'm a Sand Pebbles guy. I think he's just so good in that. And then if I had to pick, man, it's really hard. But I'm actually going to go with The Getaway. Peck and Paw McQueen, that was a match made in heaven. And Getaway is one of those easily rewatchable McQueen films. It's just so good. The whole opening is extraordinary. He does so much with silence in The Getaway that it's kind of overlooked, maybe because it's kind of a peck and paw shoot 'em up. But it's a great movie.
It is a great movie. And just 2 other references from Chasing McQueen that I just remembered. There was a little glimpse I remember seeing of Andre in The Great Escape Mode. I remember there was that one little glimpse of it in the movie. I remember that. And also the Towering Inferno, because he mentions Paul Newman's names a few times in the movie. So Towering Inferno straight away came into my head. And Papillon, how can I forget Papillon? There's a whole thing with Dustin Hoffman. So there must be like 10 movies that reference for that film, which is normal, because you're dealing with one of the greatest movie stars at a crossroads in his life. So for everyone out there that just listened to our interview, Chasing Bullitt comes out tomorrow American time, so that'll be March 5th American time, March 6th here in Australia. Available on demand, all platforms. Make sure you check it out. And to you, Joe Eddy, congratulations with the movie, your second feature film. And look, like I said, just great kind of exploration into Steve McQueen, the man, the myth, and the legend. And I congratulate you once again, and thank you very much for joining me on this podcast.
Thank you so much, Matt. I really appreciate it.